So it's now a minute after 7, and I would just start this session. We have the recording started, and I would like to welcome you all to this workshop on ecumenical peace witness in Europe. Great that you've joined this space or that you will watch it later. Please make sure to choose the language channel if you haven't. And also thank you from me to the interpreters and tech who make this possible. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat and say where you're joining from, that would be nice for everyone to know where everyone else is from. My name is Lydia Funk, and I work for the Ecumenical Peace Church Network in Europe called Church and Peace. I live in Germany, and in the next minutes, we will share this space together, and you will hear what Church and Peace is about, learn from some of our member organizations about their own expression of Peace Church witness in Europe, and then later we have some time for discussion. So a welcome also to Anthony Gwither from Germany, to Zaira Zafarna from Italy, and Karina Knight-Spencer from France, who will share about their work and are representing Church and Peace members. We had another fourth person scheduled to join us from Croatia, but unfortunately, due to the ongoing global pandemic, we will have to miss her tonight and send all our best for a speedy recovery. So, to start us off, I would like to ask a question. Please feel free to unmute yourself and say something. From your perspective, which world region or country is the least peaceful one? If you prefer to write it in the chat, that's also all right. Sick. What do you think? No wrong answers.
This is too difficult a question.
I'm thinking of Yemen.
Other way around, I can't answer.
I'm thinking of Myanmar. You know, I'm thinking of Somalia. So many places. It's difficult to choose.
It is a difficult question. Okay, well, maybe you have an answer to the next question. Which one is the most peaceful region in the world? What do you think? And yes, Heidi wrote in the chat, it all depends on how we define peace, right? So what do you think? What's the most peaceful region in the world?
Well, I believe certain South American countries get top, as do some Scandinavian countries. But you can't say all of Scandinavia or all of South America either. So region.
That's true. So it is a question of definition, yeah. Zaira says the region where there is least human presence might be the most peaceful region in the world. Yes. That's also a good thought. Yes. So according, oh, we have another chat. Elian says it's very hard to quantify. That's true, and I agree with you. And according to the Global Peace Index by the Institute for Economics and Peace, Europe is the most peaceful region in the world. And of course, they quantify it in their own ways. But if you look at this map, the darker, the bluer it gets, the more peaceful, according to them, it is. And the most, the least peaceful country is Afghanistan and Yemen, according to them. So peace in Europe is a given. We have figured it all out, and there is no need for peace building and we can export all our best peace practices into the world. Right? You might hear the irony in my voice. Not least the ongoing war in Ukraine has brought it back also to Europeans that war and violence is a reality that pains so many in our global community. So Europe needs more peace work than one might think. And not too long ago, Europe was a cradle of 2 world wars and these wars had detrimental effects on Europe and the whole world. After the Second World War, European churches and Christians, also from historic peace churches, which include Mennonites and Quakers and the Church of the Brethren, were confronted with the fact that most of them had supported or at least not opposed the decisions and actions of their governments, which led to the question, which have caused horrific suffering. It was this realization that led to questions of why have the churches accepted war and even tried to justify it? And shouldn't the churches be offering a different option, a way of peace? In its founding assembly in 1948, the World Council of Churches stated that war is contrary to the will of God. And the task of further reflection on this was also taken up by members of historic peace churches and the International Fellowship of Reconciliation in the years to follow. The incompatibility of being a disciple of Jesus and going to war was theologically reflected during discussions in the 50s, which came to be known as the Pidou conferences. The discussions about this topic and some churches still accepting military action as last resort stays discussed until today in the ecumenical realm. And it has even become topical again this year, unfortunately. Additional to these theological reflections, peace services such as IRENE, International Peace Services, were found as a mean to give peace theology a practical expression in solidarity with the marginalized and oppressed in the years to follow. And in the 70s, the search for different forms of peace church witness in Europe led to the founding of the network of communities, training centers, peace organizations, peace service agencies, and individuals who witness to nonviolence as a characteristic feature of the church. And that's Church and Peace. So Church and Peace brings together and encourages those working on peace and reconciliation in their contexts across Europe. And since its inception, the network has grown and continues to do so. It currently brings together over 100 members. There are individuals and there are groups which have more members themselves from 14 different countries and a broad range of denominations. So including Mennonites, Quakers, Catholics, Protestants, Baptists, Anglican, Methodists, you name them, we have some friends. And I put some of the members on a slide here to just give you an idea of who is there. So the common basis of Church and Peace is following the call to nonviolence, which lies at the heart of the gospel, and also a practical commitment to peace and reconciliation. And this takes different forms. So Church and Peace members say no to structures of violence in private, social, and intergovernmental relations. And also they say yes to alternatives that are already being lived out in many places. And they practice these alternatives in their lives and communities. So, but what does Peace Church witness look like in Europe today? I can imagine you asking. So it definitely has many forms. And from the over 100 members of Church and Peace, there's such a richness. It's very exciting for me always to be in contact with all of them and to see what they're working on. And I'm especially looking forward to being able to meet many of them again at our international conference in Croatia this year in October. So if you're in Croatia or have no plans yet from the 20th to the 23rd of October, drop me a message and you could join this conference. But for now, I'm really glad that this workshop is online and that it gave us the opportunity to invite some of the Church and Peace members to share about their work themselves. And so we are now going to hear from each of them for about 10 minutes each and hear what they are working on. So the first one is Karina Knight-Spencer from Stop Fueling War in France. Karina, could you please introduce yourself and share with us about how you're working for peace in Europe, and how does your faith play a role in that, and what are the topical challenges for your organization? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. So we're part of many Quaker initiatives for peace, including many in Britain and the Quaker Council for European Affairs in Brussels, and CUNO, which is the Quaker United Nations office in Geneva. All of us working on peace and human rights and going towards climate and just economic systems. So we, Stop Fueling War, came out of a silent witness at Eurosatory, which is the largest land and land-to-air arms fair in the world, in Paris, which happens every 2 years. Sometimes this was just one person and a dog, as they say, but many times we were other groups, particularly the Mennonites, were always there, and Church and Peace was there in 2018 with quite a few members joining us there. So we realized that we wanted to work on our peace testimony, which is so vital to Quakers, on the preparation for war, because we don't indulge in war, but we don't want to prepare for war. And the arms industry, the international arms industry, is the perfect example of preparing for war and not preparing for peace. So we feel the over-influential arms industry, and it's driving many conflicts. It's fueling them, it's feeding them, it's driven by profit. $2 trillion a year is spent on building up the arms in the world. And this is so disproportionate to what could be spent on peace, which would actually bring, on the alternatives, as Lydia has mentioned, which could actually bring peace in the world. But we've moved from the position of a purely faith group, working from a moral stand, to a more informed and practical organization. Because whereas we knew that standing in silent witness is important and praying is important, we felt to make a difference, we needed to organize and become better informed and to try to change the narrative. And we weren't going to change the narrative about war and peace unless we spoke. So we've been raising awareness and we've been raising our voices. We discovered that the French people hardly knew about Eurosatory, that it happened. And the media only spoke of how great it was that this had been sold and that had been sold to, whether it was Saudi Arabia or Egypt, where there was actually nothing to celebrate, but the media celebrated it. So we have obviously made some impact over the years, because this year our presence at Eurosatory gates, where we would hand out our brochures, in 2018 we handed out 10,000 to the people going into the fair. They banned us, and they banned all manifestations, all handing out of leaflets throughout the whole week, including the area around the arms fair and the other surrounding areas. And this was from right at the top. Even the prefecture of police didn't know about it on the morning we started. So Europe isn't peaceful up to a point. I would just share with you quickly one screen. There we are. That's authorized and forbidden. Is anyone saying anything against it? Did you see that? Oh, sorry, I didn't share screen. There, okay. So I'm going to give a word about France. Let me unshare my screen, which I doesn't want to do now. Stop share, sorry. There's a separation of state and religion, which is very strong. And it means that churches cannot financially support an association such as ours, or anything that seems to be political. So we can't be a church-led action. However, it's individual Quakers, it's Quaker foundations who are our main supporters, but we're open to all. And that's great as well. There are only about 100 registered Quakers in France and about as many attenders. So it's a small pool in France. On the positive side, even though we were banned, we're still being interviewed. We were interviewed by Dutch and German journalists this year, and being banned obviously brought a lot of attention. So that wasn't any harm. But being up against the arms trade is an enormous challenge. This year, we decided to concentrate on the climate and the military-industrial complex, the harm that the preparation for war, the mining, the building, the use, the destruction, the rebuilding, the destruction of weapons afterwards has on the climate. Because of the Ukraine war, there's a war mood and there was a war change. So we had planned this campaign before and we decided to stay with it. I'll show you the image of our, this is in Spanish because a group in Colombia wanted to use our visuals. We want to, excuse me, we want to approach young people. We feel the need to work very much in the world. So we work with visuals, try and grab attention, and are very much on social media. So it's about changing the narrative through podcasts, briefing papers, conferences, speaking engagements, and focused resources. We have someone who is involved in research, analysis more than research, and trying to produce documents which are easy to understand on a very complex subject. So we also go to the press and the public, not just the people going into the exhibition. That's only once every 2 years anyway. So we produced an exhibition last year called Sans Armes Citoyennes, Without Arms Citizens, which is a pop-up exhibition. I'll share the screen on some of the images, which actually the Mennonites took to Strasbourg this year and showed it in the week before Eurosatory. Let me share my screen again. So we try to present things in a, as I say, a way that is interesting and visual and available. So that's 3 on the police, 3 boards on the police, because militarization creeps into all parts of our lives. And it's certainly creeping into Europe, which is changing from soft power into paying for security. And we know that security has been taken over to mean arms and arms sales. Stop sharing again. So we have a this current campaign, which we've been handing out leaflets, both sides of a postcard. Let me just show you a couple more of those, because this has really been a lot of what we're doing, trying to change the narrative. We don't, unfortunately, do plaidoyer, what's that in English? Talking to governments yet, because we're not in that sort of position yet. But we hope to in the future. So let me move aside here. So these are the postcards. This is the one we handed out to the public, because there's been a movement within the arms trade to make things green. There's been a lot of greenwashing going on, so don't worry, it's ecological. There's the painting of the tank there. And this was the one that we handed out when we could, didn't hand out very many this year, to the people going into the exhibition. And there's obviously one in French as well. And on the back, there was facts and figures. And we will be moving towards rethinking security, because the tip of the iceberg, which is Eurosatory, is now being banned to us. So we have to readjust how we're going to get our message across, how we're going to influence peace in Europe. So this is something we actually produced a couple of years ago, lots of questions about security. What we don't have all the answers, you know, and so we have to ask the questions rather than state all the answers. I mean, if we had anywhere near the budget, if we got if the peace movement got 10% of the budget that goes towards the arms sale of the 2 trillion, we would have the answers to create so much more peace. So, you know, it's this sort of thing that we will produce. What else can I say? Individually, we're led by our faith, and the task is so enormous that we didn't come up with, we can't stand there in front of people unless we have that faith, that it's all going to be, we're backed up, we're not on our own. It's what keeps us able to do it, I think. Somebody said, how do we come up with 2 trillion? That is a SIPRI. That's the Stockholm fact-finding institution about the arms trade. So if that's good, if anyone's got any questions afterwards, I'll be very happy to answer them. Our challenge is coming up with what to do about Russia and what to do about China. And how do you defend yourself? We cannot tell to other people that they cannot defend themselves against an invader, though we might not do that. So these are the 3 very major challenges.
Thank you so much, Karina, for sharing. And yes, so we have some, if you have direct questions to Karina, we have some minutes, and actually you already answered one of them in the chat with the 2 trillion. And then there is another question in the chat. In what ways are you evaluating your campaigns?
Yes, well, we've seen a big difference over the last 5 years since we've been going. But how we evaluate that, we are part of the movement in France. We are not the only ones. There's much more media now. There have been more books. We are part of networks, and we've set up networks as well. But how you evaluate your impact is very hard. I mean, you obviously count your Facebook likes, and you count your Twitter, and how we've got a lot more people on Twitter, and you can measure that, but you can't measure whether you're actually changing the narrative or not. We believe we are.
Sometimes I wonder how people evaluated publicity in the past before Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram likes were such easily quantifiable. Are there any other questions at this point to Karina? If so, you could also unmute yourself.
What's your Twitter handle?
Stop fueling war.
Stop
Fueling war, which is, I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks.
Okay. Anthony, did you have a question? Or, yeah, okay.
Could I add something? We are an association, a membership association, and you're very welcome to join. It's open to everybody. So I'll put the website in the chat as well. You know, we are not just a Quaker organization at all. We want to be very broad. In fact, we have a peacekeeper, UN peacekeeper on our steering committee. We need to talk to people who don't always work the same way as we do.
You know, it occurs to me that you have such good graphics, and you know, if we could share some of those, or you know, it's somehow not the finished versions that are rendered, but the ones that we can change the text a little bit to fit our own organizations.
You're welcome to do that. Talk to us about that. To say we've done that for associations in Colombia, and we've shared them with World Beyond War. And previously postcards have been translated into German for distribution in Germany. Yeah, of course, the more message gets out, the better.
Thank you.
Silke, did you unmute yourself to ask a question?
Yes, I'm very much impressed. Thank you, Karina. I'm very much impressed, especially when hearing that you are 100 Quaker people in France and doing this efforts and yeah, this impact. Actually, I'm impressed, and I'm glad to hear that there is connections to Germany and you have translated that into German, and there seem to be people around who pick that up and give it in Germany also this word. I'm glad. Did I understood correctly that in France a church cannot finance any political action?
Yes. And if we're moving towards rethinking security, if it's just church-led, it won't be well thought of. We have to be much wider than that. The church has a particular position. The Catholic Church is quite powerful under the ground, you know, behind the scenes, but it's not well thought of. And you cannot legally give money to an association which is a laic organization like ours, if you're a church. So funding is a real problem. That's a real challenge.
Thank you, Karina, for sharing. And we will have more time to discuss further. And now I would like to move on to our second presenter and welcome Anthony to the space. Anthony is from the base community in Wolfshagener Hütten in northern Germany. And could you please tell us something about yourself, Anthony? Introduce yourself and share how is your life a Peace Church witness expression in Europe, and what topics and themes are on the hearts and hands of the members of the community you are living in. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here and also there. It's a bit strange, this way of communication, but it's a real way of meeting with different people. Yeah, my name is Anthony Gwither. I come from Australia and have been living in Germany for over 20 years now. For these 20 years, I've been a member of a Christian community in northern Germany. The community is called Basisgemeinde. Basisgemeinde is the German translation of the term basic ecclesial community. These basic ecclesial communities were expressions of church that developed out of the liberation theology movement in the Latin America of the 60s and 70s. Church as involved in the daily lives of the poor, with a theology that understood itself politically. The Basisgemeinde was inspired by this movement and wanted to bring the insights of this lived theology into the Germany of the 1970s and then beyond. A central vision of the community is that being church can and should illustrate through our bodies and our lives the peace that God wishes for the whole world. The peace, the shalom of the Bible, is that new order of life in which people live in a right and healing relationship with their fellow human beings and with God's creation. The hope is that by living together in community, this vision, with all its fragility and flaws, can come to expression in some small way. This community, the Basisgemeinde, is a community of about 40 people living and working together on a property in the village of Wolfshagener-Hütten, not far from Kiel in northern Germany. A further 8 people live as community in Prenzlauer Berg, a suburb of Berlin. We are a group of people, married and single, who have committed ourselves lifelong to each other in the community. We have a common work, the manufacture of wooden play equipment. In our large workshop, we produce high quality pedagogical material, which we sell all over Europe. All members of the community share in the income and the assets. From the beginning, the community understood itself as an experiment in peacemaking. On the daily level, the attempt to share lives with others, to make decisions and implement a vision of a good life together is not easy. The differences between us, in terms of both personalities and ideas, requires constant negotiation. Here, on this practical level, the effort to make peace is indeed a daily challenge. Virtually every topic in a tightly woven community has conflict potential. That the community continue also requires a lot of forgiveness of the other and of ourselves. But of course, violence and war have deeper causes than simply the differences between people. Disparities in ownership and access to resources, poverty, the will to power, the shackles of history and climate disruption all contribute in complex ways to hidden violence and open warfare. Seen in this way, the violence played out in other, mostly poorer countries also has its causes in Europe. At its most basic, the community wanted not only to protest against war, but to create lived alternatives to the above-mentioned factors which cause war. Seen through this lens, the sharing and stewardship of goods is an alternative to capital accumulation and lack of care of people and of the environment. So this, we hope, comes to daily expression in the life of the community. The expression right livelihood then describes our attempt to create an economic basis which could remove some of the causes of violence and war. With our workshop, we are trying to give a concrete example of business management that is geared towards preserving the natural basis of life, contributing to more social justice, and at the same time granting an economic livelihood. We have consciously opted for the legal form of a cooperative. We find our ideals reflected in this democratic, solidarity-based and collective approach. Another important value is that of dignified work. One of the main concerns from the beginning of the community was the creation of a dignified work. The basic idea was that all members and visitors of the community should work according to their abilities and possibilities and be cared for according to their needs. Even as a company operating in a competitive market, we would like to maintain this special working atmosphere in which the focus is on people and not performance. We experience that people with special needs also enrich everyday working life. We learn that this does not have to be in contrast to the fact that it is also possible to increase efficiency as a team and thus secure wages and operational management in the long term. We try to responsibly create energy and to use energy. We have solar energy panels, and we heat here using wood waste. And we attempt to source our materials locally, or at least in a sustainable way. Over the years, the community has offered hospitality to people who have fled war zones. At the moment, we have a Syrian family and another from Ukraine staying with us. These relationships with victims of war help make concrete the realities of conflict, which we normally only see in the media. Another activity which we have been involved in for a long time is we've held a series of vigils at an atomic power station in northern Germany that was started in 1986. These vigils, and we've been attending these vigils every month since then. And we have just stopped recently in January this year when the atomic power station went offline. This was, the atomic energy we've seen as as part of this whole atomic or nuclear process, and also for protection of the environment. So the community started with great visions and hopes of seeing real change in the world. I think since then we've acquired a more sober view of who we are and what is possible in the world. Despite the visibility of our own pains and problems, we hope to continue this experiment, which began nearly 50 years ago, believing that it is a good life and that experiments in peacemaking have to go on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anthony, and also for your peace witness and ministry. And I was just gonna ask if anyone has questions or comments to Anthony and what he shared.
Do you have connections with Bruderhof at all in the United States?
Yeah, we've had connections with the Bruderhof since almost the very beginnings of the community. At the beginning, we were selling some of their products as a way of starting off financially. We've often had young people from the Bruderhof staying with us. When they reach their 20s and are looking for a bit of orientation in life. And in our community in Berlin, over many years, the community in Berlin operates a kindergarten, and the Bruderhof have sent young women each year to spend a year working in the kindergarten there. So, yeah, we do.
You're muted.
Thanks. What's the name of the kindergarten or the group in Berlin again?
It's in Prenzlauer Berg, in the Dunkelstraße.
Prenzlauer Berg.
Prenzlauer Berg, yeah.
Oh, Lauerberg, okay. Oh, got it, thanks.
I'm sure Anthony is also able to share the link to the community as well.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
Sorry. Are you thinking about this, your witness, as just kind of something that you have to do to be faithful, or are you really more change oriented? I mean, you're probably both, but how do you deal with that? Because we experience a lot of failures when we do these kinds of things, and then I get depressed, right? When we have failures, and I go, okay, well, it's just a witness, right? I just got to do it all the time because that's what Christ calls me to do. But I do want some progress, like Karina's getting.
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, it's about being faithful to this alternative way, this alternative vision, and of course there are setbacks. People leave. There are issues. It's life. But I think because it's not just some organization which we've set up or something, because it's all our lives and our future, then it's that sort of helps and encourages to continue through the setbacks and through the difficulties.
Thanks. It's hard.
Thank you. I also, as I work as General Secretary of Church and Peace, I'm always encouraged by the different kinds of people involved, and that there is demonstration and campaign oriented, and there's also a community like Anthony's where people actually try to live it out in community and have this democratic lifestyle, as well as run a business which has a bigger idea behind. I always find this very enriching and encouraging to see different things go alongside each other. We had two more technical questions for you, Anthony. One question is, how many people are in the community again? What's the size?
We're about 40 people in Wolfshagen-Hütten.
Exactly. And how is the process to join and or leave the community organized? How does that go about?
Yeah, so the process to join is, so we welcome visitors. We ask them to stay for a week if they can, so they get a sense of a rhythm of how life is. And if they're interested, then ask them to come back for a bit longer. And then if they're still interested, if they're still persistent, then we have a status which we call guest. And so they move here and just take part in daily life. And sometimes that might be for 6 months, a year, up to 5 years or so. And then in that time, they're sort of discerning if this is the place for them, and we're discerning if this is also the place for them. So the concept is that people say, this is my place for the rest of my life. But the reality is that, I mean, there's people been here since 50 years, but also people have left, which is that's quite painful. But I think we've learned also recently, or in the last, to accept that better than we have in the past, and to also continue relationships with those people. When and how that's appropriate. It is painful, but
Thank you. There was one more comment to that in the chat. Finding ways to live peace is a very important part of constructive program and thus peace activism. So that's one comment to that. So thank you so much, Anthony. We'll have more time to discuss later on. And now I would like to invite Zaira Zafarna to take the floor, who's working with the International Fellowship of Reconciliation at the UN in Geneva, as well as in Italy. And Zaira, could you please introduce yourself and share with us how your organization is giving life and expression to the Church's call to nonviolence and peace building? What are the topical challenges in your peace witness? Please.
Thank you very much, Lydia, and thank you to everyone. I'm very glad to be here, and most importantly, I'm very happy to be able to listen to all of your experiences. They are all different experiences, and the aim is the common aim of peace, a culture of peace. So I'm here to share a little bit about the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. And I really enjoy listening to Karina and then to Anthony, because as you already highlighted, they both show two different ways and tools that we have to work for peace. One is to join others' efforts and creating campaigns. Another one is to create a community and start to experience from within ourselves the peace change that we want in the society. And IFOR in his history has tried to experiment those tools. And to answer to Glenn, it's not always successful because we are human. So it's an ongoing process and we can always learn. And it's so good to be able to participate in such meetings as this one, because we can support each other, not to give up. And also we can learn some new tips. So I would like to briefly tell you something about the starting of I4, because it's very connected to the question of Lydia. So I4 started in 1914 at the breaking of the World War I. And at that time, there was a conference in Constance about peace. Different peace activists were gathering together to find solution ways to prevent the war. Unfortunately, during the conference, the war started, so all the participants had to leave to go back to their own countries, which became suddenly enemies to each other. Two participants, the Quaker Henry Hodgins and the German Protestant Frederick Sigmund Schultz, they were friends. They said goodbye to each other at the train station, and we recall a handshaking and a promise, a commitment. They were going back to their own countries, and they were to remain faithful to the Christian teaching and values, and we refused to engage in the war, and will try all their efforts to share the message of Christ, and that we are all brothers and sisters, and refuse war. So the first members of I4 have been conscientious objectors. Many have been jailed, and this has been a very important route till today of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. We do share the history with some other organization. In 1919, a group of I4 decided to make up a specific thematic working group on disarmament, anti-militarism, and from that we have the starting of War Resistor International. And later in 1920, the first General Secretary of I4, Pierre de Cerezo, created the International Civil Service, which is still alive today. And his main action was to create camps for young people and use these young camps to youth camps to try to remediate to the destruction of the war. And the peculiarity is that he was inviting people from different countries, and he was trying to invite people from the so-called enemy country to go back to the country which was destroyed, to kind of make a practice of reconciliation. And this was a very interesting and useful and meaningful experience. I4 has branches in several countries, and each branch does independent activities, campaigns, initiatives according to the needs of the region, the country they are in. We have, of course, a common core action, which is based on nonviolence, reconciliation. We are a spiritual-based movement. And one of the aim is also the beloved community of Martin Luther King, who was a member of I4 from the USA branch. So that's the community value that we try to pursue in all our efforts. And as we talk about peace, another important topic, as I said at the beginning, is the right to conscientious objection to military service. This was one of the roots of I4, and it became one of the main work for the national branches. So many branches did engage on this right for the recognition of this right in their own countries. I'm from Italy. I joined I4 through the Italian branch, and MIR Italy was among the Italian civil society groups who worked for the recognition of this right 50 years ago. So this year is the 50th anniversary of the recognition of the right to conscientious objection to military service in Italy. we are very glad about this, and also because unfortunately this right is not recognized everywhere. This is why IFOR uses its consultative status at the UN to engage on this matter. We do run a thematic project funded by GRCT on the right to conscientious objection to military service at the UN, which consists mainly on researching and drafting reports, country-based reports on the right to conscientious objection to military service, and present this report during the review procedures at the Human Rights Council, the UPR, or at the Human Rights Committee. The member states are under review regularly, and we are able, the civil society is invited to provide some reports about the human rights situation in these countries. So IFOR focuses on the right to conscientious objection, that we have so many partners focusing on different human rights, and there are not many addressing this topic. So we are the one working on this on a country-based. We do partner with other organizations like War Resistor International, which works more on individual cases. And then our other partner is CUNO, which was already mentioned today. And CUNO works more on international standards. So we do partner together and we combine our efforts all together. And about conscientious objection to military service, this is a human right. It comes through the 18th article about the freedom of thought and conscience. And we do lobby at the UN. This means that every time there is a Human Rights Council session, which happens 3 times a year for about 1 month, we take the floor as often as possible to speak on this right in general, international standards, and referring individual cases. Lately, at the current session, which is concluding today in Geneva, we took the floor 2 days ago, and we delivered a statement on this topic. And we delivered this statement during the interactive dialogue on the situation in Ukraine. So you may understand how sensitive it is to be able to address such a topic when we talk of war. And we were able to refer to individual cases of conscientious objectors who refuse now that there is a mobilization in Ukraine to take up arms, and they have been jailed, sentenced to jail. So this is a violation to the right to conscientious objection. And unfortunately, we did highlight that there are no exceptions currently to the mobilization in Ukraine. So all males are forced not to leave the country of Ukraine. And we always take advantage of these speaking slots to restate the importance of peace negotiation. And this time we also took the advantage to call all the UN member states to work for peace negotiation and to support such a peaceful way, which is within the UN purposes. Another topic that we talk about is nuclear disarmament, disarmament in general, and more specifically also nuclear disarmament. 2 weeks ago, we did participate in the UN meetings in Vienna, the historical one, the first conference of the member states of the UN Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this has been very meaningful. And these are ways to concretely contribute to a peaceful change in the society. When we talk about the war in Ukraine, unfortunately, we hear a lot of people saying, now it's not the time for peace, it's the time for fighting. Or we can achieve peace only through weapons. So we always raise our voice to say that it's not possible to have an armed peace. And this is very important. And conscientious objectors to military service are individuals who take up the responsibility to refuse to engage in war. So they are like our heroes. We consider them as heroes. And I would like to conclude one more thing about IFOR that I can say is that another concrete action that we just took lately is a joint appeal to the European institutions. So that means the European Union and the Council of Europe to grant asylum to all conscientious objectors and deserters from the war in Ukraine, which means to people from Ukraine, people from Russia, and people from Belarus. And as I said, I come from the Italian branch of IFOR. And an example of how the national branch can bring about those issues at a different level is that, for instance, as I said, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of the recognition of the right to conscientious objection in Italy. And we are taking advantage to talk about the history. How did we struggle to achieve such an achievement, but also to show solidarity to the too many conscientious objectors in other countries who are struggling, because unfortunately this right is a human right, but is not recognized in too many countries such as Eritrea, Singapore, Turkey, just to mention a couple of them. And some of you have already mentioned the relationship also with the environment. We mentioned environment at the beginning of today's workshop. This is also valuable for IFOR, so we do work also on these issues. And just to make an example, the Italian branch, Mir Italy, has published last year a book on eco-pacifism. So ways to combine peace efforts with climate efforts. We did notice that sometimes these groups works differently or not together, not always together. So this book is like an analysis on all the ongoing efforts on environment and peace, and an invitation to all these organizations to work jointly. And lastly, we heard about a community experience. We don't have community experience yet, even though we do support some peace communities like in Colombia, the San Jose de Apartado peace community, and there are some others, we do support them. This year has been their 25th anniversary of the peace community of San Jose de Apartado. So we did some activities together, some webinars to really highlight that, as Anthony said, it is possible to make a peace experience, a concrete peace community experience. And what Mir Italy offers is some summer non-violent camps, which are like a 1 week long, and people get the possibility to experiment for just a short period of time, like 1 week, some non-violent tools and modalities in communication, working together, and doing some activities. So these are little experiences that people can do to deepen a little bit this topic. It's not easy, and we don't always have, as expected, then a follow-up from all these people, like they do not join all Mir Italy, but we are conscious that we are planting seeds, and then it's a personal process. And as we were talking about the war in Ukraine and some concrete things, there are some peace caravans going to Ukraine from several Italian organizations, and we do support them. And then something which is symbolic, we do have peace garrisons every week in Italy for peace against war in Ukraine, and especially to show people that Ukraine is not the only place where we have wars, unfortunately, and also that sending weapons, it doesn't mean that we are sending peace. It's actually quite the opposite. And even though these peace garrisons are not making possibly a concrete solution to the armed conflict, we are finding that these peace garrisons are providing people a space to express their peace needs and peace appeal. It's a space where they can talk about peace. And it's a space where we can show our commitment to peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zaira, for this rich presentation. The chat was like, wow, you're doing a lot. So there are some questions, and I would like to read out one of them. How do you respond to people who ask what the rationale for not participating in the defense of Ukraine is? How will that end up?
So this is a very common question. It's a very hard one. But the first things I would say is, what do you mean with defense? Because I think that the starting point is what you mean for defense. Politicians define defense as military defense. In Near Italy, we are working on human defense, and we have a new law proposal in the parliament in Italy for an alternative defense, which is based on civil, unarmed, non-violent defense, which is a completely different concept. So I think we need to change the meaning of the concept of defense first, and then to answer precisely, I don't have an answer, like a concrete answer, because it's very difficult. I cannot tell the people of Ukraine what they should do and what they should not do. I can report what peace activists in Ukraine are speaking up for and report their voice, but I can say what my country should do or should not do. So I think my responsibility to ensure, for instance, that Italy is not increasing the armed confrontation, but is contributing to the de-escalation. Then one thing I just mentioned is that I think that there has been an undermining of the UN role. And one of the responsibilities, for sure, NATO. It's up to NATO. We need peace allies instead of military allies.
Thank you. There is clapping. There is another question. IFOR is doing great work. And then the question is, does IFOR organize alternative service options for conscientious objectors to do public service in other ways? Could you respond to that?
So the international standard says that the right to conscientious objection means that the country needs to grant this right to those who refuse to do military service and can offer an alternative civilian service to conscientious objectors. So this is something that the country needs to provide. So what IFOR does is to do advocacy with conscientious objectors groups and organizations, and when it's possible at the UN in Geneva, also working with the diplomats to raise awareness about this and also to share good practices from other countries. For instance, at this session of the Human Rights Council, the Office of the High Commissioner presented a report, a quadriennial report, an analytical report on this right, where there are also good practices, so the countries can take from these good practices. Then some branches, like Mir Italy and other, like Austrian branch, other branches, they do have, they do run program for civil service. So if there are volunteers, civilian services, they can apply also to do service within the branches of IFOR, those who have been registered with the national institution. So this is something that we do encourage. I did start my experience within the IFOR family at the Italian branch with my civilian service. Of course, I was not an objector because there is no conscription in Italy and there is not for female. But one good practice of Italy is that even though we don't have any more conscription, we kept the civilian service as a good civilian practice for young people. So this is one of the good developments, which shows that conscientious objectors give a rich and valuable contribution to the society.
Thank you. I have seen 2 more questions in the chat. And Karina, would you like to ask a question yourself about NSU? SNU? Feel free to unmute yourself.
I just wondered, Zaira, if you were aware of the new conscription that's going on in France, the SNU.
Thank you for this question, Karina. And I mean, I could not say everything in my presentation, otherwise it was too long, but this is a very interesting point, especially for European countries. In many European countries, there is the recognition of this right. And in many countries, there is no more conscription. So sometimes people feel or think that conscientious objectors is no more an issue. It is, because it comes back with different modalities, like France, Italy, and many other countries. They don't have conscription, but they are introducing militaristic curricula in the education system. This is, again, it's not the standard conscription, but it's, I mean, why do conscientious objectors object to military service? It's because they do not want to learn to kill and kill. They don't want to learn the militaristic way of living. So when we have a country proposing a militaristic curricula in the education system, we should be alert and alarming, because again, it's the militaristic view being introduced and with the young people. So we are working also on that point and trying to invite groups, peace groups everywhere to campaign against this project of militaristic curricula. Thank you, Karina.
And it would be so easy to invest that money in non-violent training, which would bring peace in the world in the future. But it goes, once more, the money goes to the military.
Yeah, and I think the sad thing is that even they are increasing the military spending. I mean, it's not only that they spend money on military instead of other things, but they are also increasing the spending. And one thing that should really struck out to us is that during the pandemic, the military plans didn't stop. They were considered as basic needs for the society. So in Italy, they didn't turn off the military facilities, which was completely shocking to the people.
Thank you. We have one more question from Glenn in the chat. Would you like to ask it yourself, or should I read it out? I can read it out as well. Are you connected with the 5-Star Party in Italy and their shakeup of the coalition, Zaira?
So honestly, no, there is no party who is supporting peace. So that's the reality. At some point, we saw recently in the recent months that the 5 Stars was opposing the sending of weapons to Ukraine. But actually, President Conte was the one who increased the military spending in the last year. So, I mean, we were very happy and we did support this blocking, which didn't work anymore. But we cannot say that there is a Green Party which we can really support, or another party that is really supporting peace issues. Unfortunately, this is the very sad story in Italy, but I think in many other countries. It's very hard to find a political party who really commit to peace.
That is true indeed. And even those that connected to sustainability and being green from the German experience then are the loudest voice for arms exports. Thank you so much for these presentations, also the questions so far. I feel like we're already in a good discussion. And now that you've heard some of the examples of this ecumenical peace witness in Europe that Church and Peace members represent, from consensus objectors to arms export, ecological crisis, opposition to nuclear power plants, and just, Anthony, your community stayed there for over 30 years in those vigils every month. Like, that's so symbolic for, having to put an effort into it and staying strong and not getting demotivated, even though it is discouraging sometimes. Yeah, welcome the stranger, rethinking securities. I would like to open the space to more of your comments and reflections and other questions. What are your thoughts? We have different countries, different regions of the world present here. Are those the things that you as outsiders think Europe's peace needs are, or do you have other ideas? Or do you face similar questions or different ones? Yeah. I would like to open this space for comments. So you're welcome to just unmute yourself.
I just wanted to say that, well, I'm from the United States. I live in Pennsylvania, which is on the East Coast. And the United States is a very militarized country. And it's just interesting to hear about this European perspective as well. Because I think it's easy to forget that we're not the only country where peace is not the primary, well, not a thought of our governmental systems. That said, that's, it's not necessarily comforting, it's a sad reality. But it does make me start thinking about, what cross-national opportunities there might be, because we're all in this situation. America has also, I don't want to say recently, because it seems like it's been happening for a long time, but there are a lot of mass shootings. I mean, in America, gun rights are a very difficult situation. It's in our Constitution, and a lot of Americans want this right, whether it's really beneficial to them or not. So it's a huge hot button issue, and a lot of times Americans are questioning, how can we prevent these things? How do we get weapons out of individuals' hands? But it's such a difficult question, and it's something that we seem to think Europe does better at, and I don't know if that is true. But it also is a part of our embedded historical culture. So that wasn't a very cohesive thought. There were several thoughts there, but thank you for everyone who shared. I think it was great to hear about European nations and how they, how peace is trying to be enacted in European nations.
Thank you, Caitlin, for sharing. If anybody feels like they would like to respond, Karina?
I don't know if the others are aware, but the greatest polluter in the world is the American Army, is the Pentagon, which is absolutely shocking. And we don't get the transparency in Europe from our armies. At least you get it in America. That's one thing that we do actually know. You get information in America that we can't get in Europe. So that's a plus for you. But yes, getting the guns out of people's hands in Europe, we find it quite hard to understand that mindset. And you've got such a job in front of you to try and change that. I know there's been a tiny bit of change in the government this last couple of weeks.
Nope.
No, I thought the Democrats had stopped.
Terrible.
Yeah, had stopped that they had stopped the sale of not to over 18s, under 21s. Over 21s can't buy guns. Is that it now? I think they did something, but they didn't get anywhere near through what they should have got through. But a little bit of hope there.
I appreciate your positive attitude. We're struggling quite a bit over here because the every sports event you go to, people stand up for the military, and military is singing songs, patriotic songs, and it's going in the wrong direction. But so thank you for this. Is very encouraging what we're hearing here today from you folks. I just wonder, how do you get to be like emotionally a little more charged? Because community definitely is it, and while these kinds of groups in a large, like international, those are helpful, we also need local communities. And I guess you've given us lots of examples of how people have gotten together and kind of supported each other emotionally and formed personal relationships. Do you have any suggestions for that? Because we're in trouble here.
I'm sorry, I have quickly to interrupt. Christina, can you check if we can't really hear you in the Spanish translation? Can you check your mic? Now I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Well, I would certainly suggest that you get together with Quakers. Mennonites and Quakers together are a very strong bunch together. I'd also recommend World Beyond War and your local chapter on that in World Beyond War, which is very good at building community and having local chapters. They've actually got their international conference this weekend at the same time as the Mennonites as well. That's my two suggestions. But
Hi, this is Heidi. I also live in the United States. I think one large organization in our country that has, I think, been a good umbrella for connecting people is the Poor People's Campaign. It's not only focused on what we would define as peacemaking, but it is broadly focused on it's a kind of resurgence of the original Poor People's Campaign that Martin Luther King worked with, and those issues of militarism, poverty, and forgetting now what the other part is, but that holistic view that all of this is connected, and racism, thank you. And those are so alive and devastating in our day today. So that's one organization that I support and is a place to connect, and they do state and local kinds of actions and national actions. So it's I think a good connector. I also wanted to just thank all of you who have presented. It's really encouraging to hear about your work. And one of you talked about changing the narrative. I think, Karina, that was you. And I think that's an important piece of this is, when we read in the media, when we read what our governments put out, when we read what military media puts out, it fuels the idea that there are no options, that there's no alternative, that there's no other way to do life. And so the narrative of examples of speaking another truth, of demonstrating another truth is so powerful. Like, what are the other options for defense? What are the other options for security? What are other options for living together? And so changing that narrative and telling the stories, just getting the word out there is really powerful, I think.
I've started writing what I call the technologies for peace, technologies of peace, which is a long list of all the things you can do on a corporate level, international level, and a personal level. And it's just starting, and but it'd be lovely if a group of people could work on this so that you've got, we've had it to hand out in Paris. So you've actually got you could do this, you could do that, you could do that. Here's an example of this, here's an example of that, which if people want to work on contribute to. I'm very happy to share this. I'd also like to mention in America, another association I adore is the Jewish Voices for Peace, which I find very encouraging. They have a hard time because they're up against some very strong organizations, and they're always asking for money, but they're very encouraging as an action within America.
Can you talk more about, like, these are kind of online groups, I guess, forming individual groups that kind of help you feel a sense of brotherhood, sisterhood with each other and emotional support?
No, well, the Quaker meetings are in person, and the World Beyond War chapters are in person. And I think the Jewish Voices for Peace has chapters as well. So it's all people. It's not just online. That's just the way they contact each other.
Having a real community close by that you can feel and touch people, if they allow you to, is a real blessing. And I can understand your need for that, Glenn. I have that need too. Yeah, there was another question in the chat earlier. Someone asked, Zaria, you mentioned this booklet that Mir Italia brought out about eco-pacifism and where it's available. And I shared that actually you can read an English language article about it in one of the last Church and Peace newsletters that are available on the Church and Peace website as well. And also there is an article in the most recent issue about Stop Fueling War, and actually also the Basisgemeinde Wolfshagener Hütten. So if you wanted to read up more, you can just have a look at one of the newsletters as well.
I'd like to say one thing. Yeah. I'd like to say it has to be fun. You know, you get together in communities and it's got to be fun, which is why we, even though how hard the subjects are, we try and make funny visuals and things like that, because it's what brings humans together, and it's what gives us hope, is a laugh. Like when we were banned, this is really ridiculous, and what's happening in Britain is so funny. You know, it's it's important to have humor in it, because we are humans.
You were just talking about visuals, and I myself am a design researcher and a communication designer, and like I would be interested in how do you like also use nonviolence or nonviolent principles in creating images or in choosing images, or how do you reinforce nonviolence through images?
Well, we use a lot of nature images, that's for sure. We try not to use battle phrases and invent our own, and it is about taking back the word defense and security. We have to challenge ourselves all the time not to use war words. It's a big issue. But as far as images go, it's about contrast. You know, we're not going to get away from violent images. We try not to show people suffering, but buildings destroyed or nature destroyed, with the opposite as well. Have to show both sides.
May I just make a comment about this question, because a very interesting one and meaningful, especially for us, I mean, for peace activists, because I think that sometimes the risk is that we are so oriented to the aim, to the purpose, that we lose track of the modality. And these refer to the communication, like you were mentioning, images and pictures. They can be very violent, but as Karina said, also the words that we are using, and we are completely immersed in a war narrative, which means also wording. I mean, if you think of pandemic, at least in this area, they've been talking about the pandemic as a war. And they were always using the words, we need to fight back, we have our doctors, our fighters, our soldiers. I mean, it was everything compared to war, to the war system. And sometimes it can also happen that we as these activists, we are so much immersed in this culture of violence that we may use some of these words. So I think that we are the first one that need really to pay attention to the words that we use, and also in the end to remember that non-violence, it's also about having coherence between the means and the purposes. Otherwise, it's a failure.
Yes, thank you. Anthony, I was wondering if the workshop with the kids' toys is also thinking about how visuals of how to put non-violence into that. Is that a question? You need to unmute yourself first.
Yeah, so the what we produce is equipment for movement, for balancing, for climbing, this sort of thing. They're not sort of toys which are sort of yeah, sort of in normal sense. It's about movement, and yeah, there are sort of basically 2 or 3 rules. I'm not sure, I can't name them all, but taking your time and not pushing. Or yeah, that's an important rule, because it's for children. They get together, and yeah, so they go over the equipment, they climb or they balance, and yeah, I mean, there's life lessons in taking your time and not pushing and shoving other people. Yeah, sort of coming to yourself and respecting others.
Thank you, Anthony. So as our time is drawing to a close, I would like to thank you all for this space and for your comments and thoughts and this lively discussion and questions. The question you asked, Glenn, about groups and meeting, I just wanted to say that if you're ever in Europe, you're more than welcome to join Church and Peace, and we have regional events and international events which also happen in Europe on different themes, bringing together peacemakers to exchange, to share ideas, and to also share the topics they're involved with. You can find info on events or press releases, or as I mentioned, the newsletter on our website, and also you can find info on and links to the websites of the member organizations. And I wanted to finish with a prayer, but rather I would like to invite you, if you have time after the session, to join a prayer for peace in Ukraine that Church and Peace is organizing together with the Fellowship of Reconciliation in England, Scotland and Wales. It's happening every Friday evening right now in a couple of minutes after this meeting. And it's an online session of half an hour. And if you'd like to join, you can find the link to register for the Zoom meeting if you click on the link in the chat. And otherwise, yeah, I would like to thank you so much for being here, for you, the presenters, Karina, Zaira, and Anthony, for the interpretation, and also the tech from Elian and Christina. And yeah, if you want to contact anyone, you're more than welcome to send me a message, or if you want to become a member of Church of Peace, you can also send me a message and I will post my email in the chat as well. So thank you all, and I wish you a blessed day, night, morning, wherever you are based, and maybe see you at the peace prayer in a couple of minutes.